What's the bigger problem right now? Climate deniers who say that climate change isn't real, or climate doomers who give us an apocalyptic take on everything related to the weather? I'm so excited to speak to our next guest, Simon Donner, a professor and climate scientist at the University of British Columbia, and he got my attention a few weeks back with a tweet. Here's what the tweet was. I feel like I spent the first half of my career explaining that climate change is dangerous, and will spend the latter half of my career explaining that climate change isn't as dangerous as many doomist people now seem to think. Let's go to Simon Donner with a little bit more on climate science and denying and doomism when it comes to it. Professor Donner, welcome to the program. Simon.
Thanks for having me on.
Listen, the tweet that I just read, the reason it spoke to me is because I've been on radio and TV now for quite some time and daily for over a decade now. And I feel like my career, it's the same thing. I spent so much time trying to convince people that climate change is real. And now I feel I'm spending more time trying to convince people they're not all going to die. So what's your take here, Simon? Tell me your perspective.
Well, I've been studying, researching, working on, observing climate change basically for 25 years, for half my life. And climate change is dangerous. I mean, climate change is real. It is the challenge of the century, both because the impacts are so tremendous, but also because it's such a challenging thing to solve. But we don't need to scare people into thinking that humans are going extinct to motivate climate action. And I feel like at some point during the past few years, a segment of sort of climate communication just went slightly off the rails and became, I don't know what happened, but we sort of became convinced that we need to scare people even more. Rather than just communicate the very realistic and dangers that are out there. Yeah.
So how do you deal with it? One thing that happens to me on this program, I'll be doing an interview with a politician, with someone who's very well-meaning, like I feel I am. I'm a well-meaning person. I believe in science, and I'm speaking to a politician, and they'll just casually throw out that we are in the midst of a mass extinction event, right? And it's such doom and gloom. And then they go on with their sentence talking about recycling, And it just feels like everything is so pervasive, So how do you deal with that when you're having conversations with someone that may be a little bit too much of a doomer?
Well, the thing is, how people respond to anything going on in the world, really, it's as much about their own experiences, their own cultural identity, et cetera. And so if you just fight somebody about what they really deeply believe, they're not going to listen to you. They're more likely to double down. And I can say I learned that from years of trying to talk to people who don't think climate change is real, who don't believe the overwhelming consensus of the scientific community, that if you just batter them with facts, it's not going to make a difference. But if you try to just connect with them one-on-one based on values, it's worth it. Because I think there's something really important scientifically here to understand is that, climate scientists, based just on physics and chemistry, have been able to say what's happening to the planet, and we're able to make predictions for the future that show that what's going to happen depends a lot on choices we make around fossil fuels and greenhouse gas emissions and, how severe climate change will get. But those predictions are about the kind of physical climate and a little bit about biology and the ecosystems around the planet. But when it comes to what's going to happen to society, you can't predict it very well with a model. And so what that's done has left things open for interpretation. So people can take results straight out of the scientific community, straight from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and choose all of the worst, the high end of every error range, and then tell a story based on that sounds terrible. And if somebody wants to believe that, well, they're going to choose to believe it. And it's not that easy to fight. So I always think the most important thing is to understand why are you so scared about climate change? Like, what is bringing you to feeling this way?
And I wonder why people are afraid or scared. I would imagine some headlines have to do with it. We're with Professor Simon Donner, a climate scientist at the University of British Columbia. And I saw just last week some headlines of the UN declaring that we're no longer in a state of global warming, but, quote, global boiling. And I saw that. I said, well, no wonder people are afraid. No wonder people are scared.
So, listen, far be it for me to challenge the Secretary General of the United Nations.
Yeah.
He's doing, listen, I have a ton of respect for him. He's doing the right thing by trying to raise attention to climate change and how the world's governments have been way too slow to respond. This, as I said, is like an incredibly important challenge for the world that we need to face, right? Or we're going to just have more suffering as a result. But I think that what's happened over the past few years is as climate change has gotten more and more attention, which I'm happy about, and most people who worry about this problem are happy about, a lot of the prominent voices now are not folks that have learned from the experience of being a voice on climate change for 20 or 25 years and haven't learned that actually trying to I wouldn't say exaggerate, but trying to use the most inflammatory language and trying to scare people doesn't work with most of the population. It works with some people for sure, but there's research evidence that shows it doesn't work with most people. And so when the Secretary General said global boiling, I'm like, listen, I love you're talking about this, but oh my God, learn from the psychological research about what works when communicating about climate change. There's not much evidence that doing that works.
And do we have good reason, Simon, to be positive about the future, that humans who got us into the mess will also be able to find the solutions? Do we have evidence that the solutions are actually already underway? And maybe do you have optimism?
I have optimism, but I don't really like the word sort of hope and optimism that people ask me about all the time. I think this is really about courage, because we have a pretty good idea of what the solutions are, and most of the solutions to climate change are good ideas even if they weren't causing climate change. Like burning fossil fuels, driving gasoline vehicles and everything, that also creates most of the world's air pollution. And air pollution kills millions of people around the world each year. So shifting away over time is a good idea. The challenge is we're just not doing it fast enough. And most of what we're doing right now are kind of incremental, small measures where we really need to do transformational things. And to me, that's why climate change is a challenge. We need transformational change, but our governments and our systems of doing things, they're not used to making that level of transformation.
On incremental versus exponential, and electric cars or even the switch to renewable energy. I do keep seeing examples, if you look at the sales of EVs in BC, right, in your province, it's a hockey stick curve. Like the sales are growing exponentially. I look at how Texas is taking on renewables, and that growth has gone in, not incremental, but it's much faster than that. So I know maybe I hate to use the word hope, but do you have any glimmers here where we are actually moving faster than just incrementally?
Yeah, there are places where we're going to, but it really, we're still looking at the need for more transformational change. VC's at the point of selling about 10% of cars need to be electric. Well, we need to get 100, and that's for passenger vehicles. Large transport's going to be a different story, but so we're on the way in a lot of places. We're just not doing it fast enough, and I just don't think, and I think there's evidence for this, that doubling down on scaring people isn't going to motivate you to change. My mother always used to tell me that, you can't run away, you can't just run away from something. You need to have a reason to run towards the next thing. And I feel like we're spending so much time scaring people about the world we're trying to avoid rather than exciting them about the world we're trying to create.
To me, the greatest example of that, Simon, is the people saying, I will not have a kid. I won't bring a child into this world. What do you say to someone that is so afraid that they're saying no more to kids?
Well, I'll say, that decision is so personal. It's hard to know how to even have a conversation. But I think in those cases, I mostly I ask them why they feel the way they do. Most times we make the mistake of trying to convince or change somebody's mind. Whereas it's much better just to try to get to understand where someone's coming from, to make them see that you're interested and curious and you actually do want to understand their line of thinking, because most folks aren't as certain in their thinking as we expect. And as you ask more questions, you start to find out a little bit more, you can connect a little bit more, and then maybe there's a moment to say, listen, it's your call if that's the choice you want to make, but I want to let you know that the world scientists aren't telling you to do it.
Simon, it's just fun to take a few moments here to speak to a climate realist, not a doomer. And you're serious on the subject. You talk about the real issues and the serious issues that we have to overcome. But it's great not to just get the doomer's perspective at times, which I feel sometimes on this program I end up in it, even if I don't want to be there. Thanks so much. I appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me on.
That is Professor Simon Donner, climate scientist at the University of British Columbia.